Hello, my dear friends. Today I am sharing the story of Adolf Hitler, one of history's most infamous figures. To truly understand the man, his impact, and the devastation he caused, we must start from the very beginning of his life, delving into his childhood, family, aspirations, and the political circumstances that shaped him. This story is not an endorsement, but a deep exploration of a historical figure whose actions forever changed the world. A humble birth in Braunau, am Inn. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889, in the small Austrian town of Braunau am Inn, located on the border with Germany. His parents were Alois Hitler and Clara Pelzel. Alois was a mid-level customs official, a stern and authoritarian figure who often clashed with his son. Clara, on the other hand, was a kind and gentle woman, deeply devoted to Adolf, her fourth child. Of the 6 children born to the couple, only Adolf and his younger sister Paula survived into adulthood. The family's financial situation was modest, but they were not impoverished. Alois's job provided stability, yet his harsh demeanor created a strained family environment. Adolf often sought refuge in his imagination, developing an early interest in art and German nationalism. Early education and aspirations. Adolf's academic record was inconsistent. He initially excelled in primary school but struggled as he progressed. His teachers described him as bright but moody and unmotivated, often clashing with authority figures. Despite his father's insistence that Adolf follow in his footsteps as a civil servant, the young boy dreamed of becoming an artist. This dream led him to Vienna in 1907, where he applied to the Academy of Fine Arts. His rejection from the Academy dealt a significant blow to his self-esteem, marking the first of many personal failures that would fuel his bitterness and later ambitions. Struggles in Vienna. Between 1908 and 1913, Hitler lived in Vienna, struggling to make ends meet. He worked odd jobs and painted postcards to survive, living in a boarding house for the impoverished. These years were formative, exposing him to a melting pot of ideas, including the growing tide of anti-Semitism prevalent in Austrian society. Hitler became deeply influenced by nationalist ideologies, blaming Jews, Marxists, and liberals for the perceived decline of German culture and power. World War I, a turning point. In 1914, Adolf Hitler moved to Munich and enlisted in the German army at the outbreak of World War I. Serving as a messenger on the Western Front, he found a sense of purpose and camaraderie in the war effort. Hitler was wounded twice and was awarded the Iron Cross for bravery, a decoration he wore with pride for the rest of his life. However, Germany's defeat in 1918 devastated him. The Treaty of Versailles, which imposed harsh penalties on Germany, became a source of intense resentment for Hitler. He viewed the treaty as a humiliation and blamed Jewish and Marxist politicians for the country's loss, a belief that became central to his political rhetoric. The rise of the Nazi Party. After the war, Hitler remained in Munich, drifting until he found a role as an informant for the German army. His duties included monitoring political groups, one of which was the German Workers' Party, DAP. He joined the party in 1919 and quickly rose through its ranks due to his oratory skills and charisma. By 1921, he had taken control of the party, renaming it the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP, or Nazi Party. The party's platform centered on anti-Semitism, German nationalism, and opposition to communism and the Treaty of Versailles. Hitler's speeches drew large crowds, and he cultivated a cult of personality around himself, portraying himself as Germany's savior. The Beer Hall Putsch and imprisonment. In November 1923, emboldened by his growing support, Hitler attempted to seize power in Munich through the Beer Hall Putsch. The coup failed, resulting in his arrest and imprisonment. During his time in prison, Hitler wrote Mein Kampf, My Struggle, a manifesto outlining his ideology and plans for Germany. Though the book was not initially successful, it later became the blueprint for Nazi policies. Hitler's time in prison was a turning point. He realized he could not seize power through force alone, but needed to manipulate democratic institutions to achieve his goals. The path to power. Throughout the 1920s, Germany grappled with economic instability, hyperinflation, and the Great Depression. Hitler exploited these crises, using propaganda to position himself as the solution to Germany's woes. By 1933, the Nazi Party had become the largest in the German parliament. Hitler was appointed Chancellor on January 30, 1933, by President Paul von Hindenburg. Once in power, Hitler moved quickly to consolidate control. The Reichstag fire was used as a pretext to suppress opposition and pass the Enabling Act, granting him dictatorial powers. The Nazi regime began implementing its totalitarian agenda, targeting Jews, communists, and other perceived enemies. World War II and the Holocaust. Hitler's aggressive foreign policy aimed at expanding German territory led to the invasion of Poland in 1939, triggering World War II. Over the next 6 years, Hitler's forces occupied much of Europe, committing atrocities on an unprecedented scale. The Holocaust remains one of the darkest chapters in human history. Under Hitler's leadership, the Nazi regime systematically murdered 6 million Jews and millions of others, including Romani people, disabled individuals, and political dissidents. Hitler's vision of a pure Aryan race resulted in immense suffering and destruction. The downfall. As the war turned against Germany, Hitler became increasingly isolated and erratic. The D-Day invasion in 1944 and the subsequent Allied advance marked the beginning of the end for the Third Reich. By April 1945, Soviet forces had encircled Berlin. On April 30, 1945, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. His death marked the collapse of the Nazi regime, leaving Germany in ruins and millions dead. Post-war reckoning and the aftermath of Hitler's rule. After Hitler's death and Germany's surrender on May 7, 1945, the world faced the daunting task of reckoning with the aftermath of his rule. The devastation was almost incomprehensible. Europe lay in ruins. Over 70 million people had died during the war, and millions were left homeless. The Nuremberg trials, held between 1945 and 1946, sought to bring Nazi leaders to justice for their crimes. 24 of Hitler's closest associates were prosecuted for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Many were convicted and executed, while others received lengthy prison sentences. These trials set a precedent for international law and accountability, ensuring that such atrocities would not go unpunished in the future. Germany's division and reconstruction. Hitler's vision of a 1,000-year Reich ended in just 12 years, leaving Germany shattered. The country was divided into four occupation zones controlled by the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, and France. This division eventually solidified into two separate nations: West Germany, Federal Republic of Germany, and East Germany, German Democratic Republic. The Marshall Plan, led by the United States, helped rebuild Western Europe, including West Germany, fostering economic recovery and stability. However, East Germany fell under Soviet control, becoming a communist state and a focal point of the Cold War. The Berlin Wall, erected in 1961, symbolized the ideological divide between the two halves of the country. The legacy of Hitler's ideology. The ideology Hitler propagated did not vanish with his death. Neo-Nazi movements have emerged in various parts of the world, attempting to revive his hateful ideas. However, the global community has consistently condemned these groups, emphasizing education and remembrance as tools to combat extremism. Holocaust memorials and museums, such as Yad Vashem in Israel and the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, serve as powerful reminders of the atrocities committed under Hitler's regime. Germany itself has made significant efforts to acknowledge its past, instituting strict laws against Holocaust denial and Nazi symbolism. Lessons from history. Adolf Hitler's life and actions highlight the dangers of unchecked ambition, the power of propaganda, and the devastating consequences of prejudice. His rise to power was not solely the result of his charisma or determination, but also a reflection of the social, economic, and political conditions of the time. The Great Depression, resentment over the Treaty of Versailles, and widespread unemployment created fertile ground for Hitler's radical ideas. His ability to exploit fear and division allowed him to manipulate the German people and dismantle democratic institutions. Understanding the factors that enabled his rise is essential to preventing similar tragedies in the future. It underscores the importance of vigilance in protecting democracy, promoting tolerance, and addressing the underlying issues that fuel extremism. Germany's healing process. Post-war Germany underwent a painful and complex healing process. The destruction wrought by Hitler's regime left scars not only on the physical landscape, but also on the national psyche. For many Germans, coming to terms with their country's role in the atrocities of World War II was a deeply personal and collective journey. The German government initiated a policy known as Vergangenheitsbewältigung, coming to terms with the past. This included widespread efforts to educate future generations about the Holocaust, support for survivors, and legal measures to confront those who still harbored Nazi ideologies. Monuments like the Holocaust Memorial in Berlin and the Stolperstein Project, which places brass plaques at the last known residences of Holocaust victims, serve as enduring tributes to the victims of Nazi terror. These efforts ensure that the horrors of the past are remembered, fostering an environment where such ideologies are less likely to resurface. Impact on global politics and society. The aftermath of Hitler's regime reshaped the global political landscape. The United Nations was established in 1945 to promote peace and prevent future conflicts on the scale of World War II. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted in 1948, was heavily influenced by the atrocities committed during Hitler's reign. The genocide perpetrated by the Nazis also gave rise to the term genocide itself, coined by Raphael Lemkin, and spurred the adoption of the Genocide Convention in 1948. This legal framework aimed to hold nations accountable for acts of mass murder and persecution. On a broader level, Hitler's regime demonstrated the destructive potential of authoritarianism and intolerance. Many post-war democracies strengthened safeguards against totalitarianism, emphasizing human rights, diversity, and inclusivity. The enduring shadow of Hitler. Despite the global effort to denounce Hitler's ideology, his name continues to evoke strong emotions and debates. Scholars, historians, and psychologists have analyzed his life and decisions to understand the factors that led to his rise and the devastating consequences of his rule. Some argue that focusing too much on Hitler as an individual detracts from understanding the societal and institutional failings that enabled him. The lessons drawn from his story extend beyond one man's actions to encompass the responsibility of societies to resist hatred and uphold justice. The personal lives he destroyed. Beyond the statistics of war and genocide, Hitler's actions impacted countless individuals and families. Survivors of the Holocaust and their descendants carry the weight of those horrors, often struggling with intergenerational trauma. The memories of lost loved ones, the shattered communities, and the stories of resilience and survival remain deeply personal yet universally significant. Even among Germans who lived through the Nazi era, there were varying degrees of complicity and resistance. Some actively supported Hitler's regime, while others risked their lives to oppose it. Understanding these complexities helps paint a fuller picture of the human cost of dictatorship and war. A legacy of vigilance. The story of Adolf Hitler serves as a stark warning of what can happen when fear, prejudice, and authoritarianism are allowed to flourish. His rise to power was not inevitable. It was facilitated by economic despair, political instability, and a society willing to scapegoat others for its problems. Education remains the most powerful tool in ensuring that the mistakes of the past are not repeated. By teaching future generations about the dangers of propaganda, the importance of critical thinking, and the value of human rights, the global community can work towards a more just and peaceful world. A final reflection. Adolf Hitler's life is a grim testament to the consequences of hatred, ambition, and the abuse of power. Yet, from the darkness of his legacy, humanity has found opportunities for growth, unity, and remembrance. His story is not just one of destruction, but also of resilience, of the millions who fought against him, survived his tyranny, and rebuilt a world scarred by his actions. As we remember the past, we must continue to strive for a future defined by understanding, compassion, and vigilance against the forces of hatred that still linger in the shadows.